Today, a video about underwater cameras and which one might be best for you. So stick around. Hey guys, Joe here. And if you have any interest in underwater photography or underwater cinematography, you live in a great time because camera technology has come so far in the recent years, making it possible for just about anybody in any budget to go out and capture some unique quality visuals. And it's just fantastic. I can't say enough about it. So today I want to talk about three genres of cameras and how they can apply to underwater imagery, and more specifically how they may work for your underwater imagery intentions. We're going to talk about action cameras, talk about point and shoot cameras, we're going to talk about DSLR cameras. Each camera type takes both video and stills, and the newer models provide all sorts of bells and whistles as far as things like high frame rates, high resolutions, just the list goes on. And I'm not going to get into all those specific details. I'm going to focus more on the practicality of using these cameras offshore in their overall quality and the expectations you should have for them. So here we go. First things first, let's start with action cameras. Everybody knows this. This is a GoPro, very common, probably the most popular action camera out there, but there are other manufacturers that make quality cameras as well. This happens to be the GoPro. These are perfect for capturing the moment. They're super simple. You can push one button, stick it on your head, somewhere, mount it wherever, go dive, record that whole dive, and if something really cool happens, a big shark comes up, a whale comes up, heck, maybe even Loch Ness shows up, you've got your evidence now because you just pushed your one button on this very simple camera. So that in itself is probably the biggest pro for this type of camera, an action camera. And another thing is price point. You can get a high quality action camera for under a few $100 now. And that's pretty impressive. They're simple, mostly fully automatic, so you don't have to worry too much about settings. They're rugged, compact, and even if something horrible happened at the price point you can get these at, yeah, it would stink to lose or damage one of these, but it wouldn't be nearly as bad as if you lost or damaged one of the higher end cameras we'll talk about in a minute. Now, the pros of this camera are also the cons. The simplicity of operating this camera has some negatives in it as well. So you really don't have any manual control over anything. Pretty much in most action cameras, everything's just about fully automatic. So you're very limited in manual control. That takes away some creative freedoms if you want to create a certain type of look or image. One example of that is white balance. As far as scuba diving is concerned, you really need an aggressive white balance capability to take advantage of natural light. And you really don't have that in the action cameras yet that I'm aware of. Very limited white balance options. That's kind of a bummer. However, you can do some settings with this camera, capture a fixed white balance, and then you can edit in post-production to get a reasonably good image. And I've actually done a tutorial on color correcting GoPro footage, so if you're interested, check it out. The other kind of bummer with these cameras is they're small cameras, which is one of the pros, but they also have very small image sensors. And small image sensors are generally okay in bright outdoor environments, but what happens is when you go down underwater, especially past 30 feet, we start to lose a lot of light. And that's a negative with these cameras because being small image sensors, they have very little real estate to capture a lot of light. And since it's an automatic camera, when we go down deeper, the one setting the GoPro can change, especially when on video mode, is the ISO, which is the camera's sensitivity basically. And so it's going to increase that ISO up as we descend. And with a small image sensor camera, the higher the ISO goes, the grainier the image is going to get. And that's very noticeable on small image sensors cameras. So in a dark environment, we're going to get some grain with these cameras if we're not using artificial light. And the other potential concern with this camera is if you do have ambitions to get more involved in underwater photography or cinematography, if you just rely on this camera, it's kind of hard to learn from it since it's fully automatic. You're not going to be experimenting with shutter speed, ISO, and aperture, the three main variables you would control in more proper full control photography and cinematography. So having said all that, these things are fantastic. I think every scuba diver should have them, whether you're into photography or cinematography or not, just for that option to capture the moment. At the price point, they're hard to beat. So pretty impressive stuff, these little cameras. So next I want to talk about the point and shoot cameras. And each camera manufacturer makes their version of what I'm calling point and shoots. And the basic takeaway for what a point and shoot is, it's just a small, compact camera that allows mostly full manual control of the camera. So you can generally control your ISO, your aperture, your shutter speed with these cameras. It's giving you the same functionality as a professional level camera. And I think these are ideal for underwater cinematography and photography, whether you're just getting started or if you're already involved in the hobby or industry. Some of the pros are these. One, the price point. You can get a pretty high quality point shoot type camera for a few hundred to say up to $1,000 for the real high end ones. And that's pretty good for what these things can do. What I'm most excited about with these right now though, is now these are coming out with larger image sensors. Originally, and this camera is a good example, this is a very old camera now. This is a small image sensor camera. So even though I have full manual control of this camera, I still had a small image sensor, and that could be somewhat problematic when I would need to increase the ISO in low light situations. I could end up with a grainy image. Now, some of the newer point and shoot cameras come with larger image sensors. That should mean we should be able to get much higher image quality out of these cameras, even in lower light underwater situations. And that's pretty exciting. And not to say that the smaller image sensor cameras can't do well. I've actually published a reef guidebook using images captured from this camera. Other pros about them, lens is fixed, they're generally decent quality, and they're generally fairly wide at the open end, which is good for underwater work. They're real easy to travel with, whether you're getting on a plane, going somewhere, or even just going out in the boat to do your dive. These are small cameras, easy to do whatever you need to do with them. Pretty cool. These cameras actually work very well for macro photography when using the onboard flash. You can actually get really close to the image and possibly get yourself in situations that you couldn't do with even a more professional camera. So these are very good for macro photography when used correctly. Now, the cons with these cameras are, the first obvious one is you have to get an underwater housing to put these cameras in. And oftentimes you have to go to a third party to do that, and they can be very expensive. And on top of that, sometimes you lose the ability to use the onboard flash in some of those housings. That would take away some of the macro photography options I just talked about. However, I like the Canon point shoot cameras, and I'm not sponsored or supported by Canon at this point. But one of the reasons I like the Canon cameras is they actually offer their own housing, and they're modestly priced. They generally give you full function of the camera, and you can actually use the flash. So that's pretty cool. Another potential negative of these is not all point and shoots do come with large image sensors at this point, and some don't offer full manual control on everything. So for example, some may offer manual control on the picture settings, but not on the video setting. If video is important to you, make sure you find one with full manual control in the video settings. And I'll reference some links below to some cameras that may be worth considering. Cool stuff. Finally, if utmost control and quality is your thing, it's time to consider a DSLR camera. Full frame DSLR cameras can easily produce professional broadcast quality imagery. And I think there's two main reasons that they're capable of producing such quality imagery. One is a large image sensor, specifically a full frame image sensor DSLR. That large image sensor is a lot of real estate for light to land on. What that does essentially is make that camera better able to capture quality imagery in low light situations. You can generally increase your ISO substantially on a full frame camera before you start to see the negative effects of grain. That in itself is very powerful with these cameras. Second to that are the optics. You can put whatever lens you want on these cameras and benefit from those premium optics from those lenses. So these cameras are primed to produce some quality results. Of course, these cameras have full manual control over key settings like ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, and some even have quite a bit of flexibility in things like white balance, which is phenomenal. As I said, they're definitely capable of producing production and broadcast quality results. In fact, I've used DSLR cameras in some of my work I've done with National Geographic, and I even produced a documentary for a marine conservation organization using solely DSLR cameras for the underwater work. And I'll leave some links if you want to check out some of those examples. These cameras are rugged and robust, and when you put them in a big underwater housing, they just feel legit. And I kind of say that jokingly, but I actually do think that's a pro, because when you're holding this big, expensive camera in this elaborate lunar lander type case, you just feel professional, and it almost puts you in a mindset like you're primed to go do some professional work to capture some awesome content. In comparison, when you're holding something like this in the point and shoot range, this is a lot more like a bath toy. And not to say you can't do professional results with it, but it just, you don't get that subconscious mental big underwater housing with the point and shoot. And I do think that's a pro to have that drive when you're holding this camera, because I do think it helps you maximize the quality of imagery you can capture with that camera. And the main con of this camera is there's a price for the quality. High-end DSLR cameras can start around several $1,000s and go up from there. That's just the camera body itself. Then there's optics, lenses, those can be thousands of dollars. And then there's accessories to the camera. Then of course you need an underwater housing, which oftentimes can be even more expensive than the camera itself. A lot of times underwater housings are sold a la carte, so you gotta get a lot of accessories for that underwater housing for it to even work underwater. And you can easily get to the point where you are escorting a camera setup that's more expensive in the car you're driving it in. So there's definitely an investment for these types of cameras. The second is kind of the overall complexity. One, just general logistics, getting the camera where you want it to go. There's some preparation involved. They're big, they're bulky, they're not travel friendly if you gotta fly somewhere. It's a lot of equipment to fly with. Just going on a boat ride to get to your dive site is cumbersome because you have this big old camera that's expensive and it's on a boat with other divers, and you wanna make sure that it doesn't get damaged at all. So in addition to those logistics, you have this kind of ongoing anxiety when you have one of these cameras because of its value. You're one, worried about it all the time on the boat because you want anyone else to damage it. And then two, there's a weird mental game when you jump into the water. You have all this money in electronics and you're trying to jump into salt water, and that's just hard to get over. And sometimes stuff happens. There are bad days where housings can break, water can get in, and cameras can be ruined. And if that ever does happen, it's a big investment that just got washed down the drain. Having said that though, you can do a lot of preparations and coordination to minimize the chance of those horrible situations happening. But it does leave that anxiety in your mind. So when you're offshore, you have this additional burden of worrying about the camera equipment because of its value. The other thing to consider too is they are somewhat complex to use underwater. Eventually you kind of learn and you'll get more efficient with these types of cameras, but these are complex cameras to get dialed in just right for the imagery you want. And when you're underwater and you don't have a lot of time to begin with, that's something else that's kind of a hurdle. But eventually you do start to master these cameras and get better with them. But it is something to consider. So those are the three types of cameras that I think all serve a valuable place in the underwater imagery realm. And if it was up to me, I would prefer to have an assortment of all these cameras. But if you only have to pick one, you have a modest budget and you are serious about getting into underwater photography and cinematography, I would highly consider the point and shoot. It's a modest price point and you have the full control, and I think you are capable of producing professional imagery with it. So that is it. If you thought this was helpful, please give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in underwater photography and cinematography, please subscribe and feel free to leave any comments about any topics you would like to see described further. Thanks for watching. I'm Joe Kistel.